Hey Optimancers, Chris here. There are a lot of weird rules in D&D. Either they don't make sense, or they're so unclear it's really anyone's guess how they're even supposed to work. I've talked about some of these kinds of rules on the channel before, usually when I'm discussing other topics, but today I'm going to list some of the weirdest rules I've come across in this game. This isn't even close to an exhaustive list, so let me know your favorite, or maybe your least favorite weird rules in the comments down below. But today, I'm going to list 5, not just have me scratching my head. Now, I'll beat some of you to the punch. Fortunately, when we play D&D, we have a DM. And when things don't make sense, it's the DM's job to make a ruling to help things continue in, a reasonable way, including having things not work exactly as the rules say. And good thing, too, because some of these rules, they just don't work well otherwise. So these are in no particular order, but let's start with number 5. So we have ourselves an artificer, and we get this pretty nice feature at level 7 called Flash of Genius. It says starting at 7th level, you gain the ability to come up with solutions under pressure. When you or another creature you can see within 30 feet of you makes an ability check or a saving throw, you can use your reaction to add your intelligence modifier to the roll. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier, minimum of once. And let's take special note of that. Minimum of once. So no matter what your intelligence is, you can use this at least once. You regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. Okay, so it's a little weird that they don't tell you when the modifier is added. Like, is it before the roll is made? After, but before the results occur? Or can the results actually be changed? But, that's not super weird. We just come up with a ruling. I think most people do it, like, after the roll is made, but before the results occur. But there is something about it that is super weird. So there is a spell called Feeble Mind. So here's the spell. And if you are a victim of this spell, your intelligence and charisma scores become 1. You can't cast spells, activate magic items, understand language, or communicate, but you can identify your friends and follow and protect them. It also doesn't say anything about activating class features that aren't spells, so assumably we still can. So let's get back to Flash of Genius. Okay, so we got hit with Feeble Mind. According to this feature, we can still use it because it can be used a minimum of once per long rest, even if we have a -5 ability modifier to our intelligence. Now, what happens if you add a negative? Well, what you do is you subtract it. So, what happens is when we use Flash of Genius with a -5 penalty on our intelligence, then actually we're inflicting a -5 penalty on an ability check or saving throw with this feature. And it doesn't say we have to use Flash of Genius on an ally, nor does it say the person you use it on has to be willing. So we could use Flash of Genius when our artificer has been reduced to an idiot to inflict a -5 penalty on another creature's saving throw, and they have no way to resist it. So I guess we would need to rename the feature to Surge of Stupidity or something. And this would be legal. I just don't understand how it would possibly work, but because it doesn't say that it has to be a positive modifier, this would be legal, but incredibly weird. That brings us to number 4, flying. Okay, so I get that in 5th edition they wanted to simplify the flying rules, but we really end up with some weird interactions. So according to the rules on flying, if a flying creature is knocked prone, has its speed reduced to 0, or is otherwise deprived of the ability to move, the creature falls unless it has the ability to hover or it is being held aloft by magic, such as the fly spell. First off, let's talk about hover. So that's all hover does, is hover keeps you from falling if your speed is reduced to 0 or you're knocked prone. But the weird thing is that you can fly and you can still hover, even if it doesn't say hover. I mean, you can go to one space and just stay there, and that's fine as long as you could move, then you don't fall. But if for some reason you wouldn't be able to move, then you fall. So that's pretty weird. It kind of makes you wonder what's the point of having hover when anything without hover can still technically hover, at least by the English definition of it. But if you don't have hover and you're reduced to speed 0 or you're knocked prone, then you fall. And the rules on falling say, at the end of a fall, a creature takes 1d6 bludgeoning damage for every 10 feet it fell, to a maximum of 20d6. The creature then lands prone unless it avoids taking damage from the fall. Xanathars expands on this rule with two more optional rules. The first is rate of falling, which says when you fall from a great height, you instantly descend up to 500 feet. And if you're still falling on your next turn, you fall up to another 500 feet at the end of that turn. So this is an optional rule that basically says that you don't fall an infinite distance on your turn. And then it says, but if you want a flying creature to have a better chance of survival, you can subtract the creature's current flying speed from the distance it fell before calculating falling damage. So we have this young white dragon, and they're flying way in the sky, say 300 feet up, and it comes across this young brash dragon. So they start to fight, and the white dragon wins initiative. What should it do? Well, it could use its mighty breath weapon, doing, 45 damage on a failed saving throw, or it could make 3 attacks, and if they all hit, it would expect to do about 37 points of damage. Or it could trip the brash dragon, and the brash dragon would fall prone, fall 300 feet, but we reduce its fall by its flying speed, so 220 feet, which is still over the maximum, so the dragon takes 20d6 falling damage, or 70 points on average. This is basically about double what we would expect from attacks, or 1.5 times what we'd expect from the breath weapon. In other words, just far, far superior to trip than anything else it could do. And this is pretty much universal. If the creatures don't have hover, they are going to do way more damage by tripping each other than anything else they could do. I mean, assuming they're high up in the sky. So shouldn't all flying creatures, when fighting, just try to trip each other over and over again? And what's this falls instantly 500 feet nonsense? Like, shouldn't the fall take place over the following round, like several seconds? And if the dragon is flying this way, shouldn't it hit the ground, like a little bit further this way? Where's the momentum? According to the rules, no, they're tripped, and they've instantly fallen 500 feet directly downward. The whole thing is just really strange, and tends to make fights with flying enemies really silly. And DMs, if you were playing the monsters smart, then tripping is pretty much all they should do, and flying creatures should be absolutely terrified of flying high in the sky, because tripping is so easy in the game. I mean, it doesn't matter what you got. You could have an ancient dragon with legendary resistances, and they're not going to help against a successful trip attempt. And suddenly this massive, super powerful creature is lying in a lump down on the ground. Okay, onwards to number 3, Blindsight. Okay, so can anyone actually tell me how this works? Because the rules sure don't. A creature with Blindsight can perceive its surroundings without relying on sight within a specific radius. Creatures without eyes, such as oozes, and creatures with echolocation or heightened senses, such as bats and true dragons, have this sense. Okay, so what do you mean by perceive? Do you mean see? If I need to see someone to cast a spell targeting them, does Blindsight work? I think most people would say yes. But then the next question is, does it work like vision? If so, it should probably be blocked by walls, and you should be able to hide from someone using Blindsight. Wait, Jeremy Crawford says you can't hide from someone with Blindsight. So what if you're behind a wall? Can they see you through full cover? How does a bat see through a wall using its echolocation? That doesn't make any sense at all. And by the way, if you can see the wall, what about colors? Do you see them? Can you recognize people? Or is it just like radar giving you little blips? What about things that don't affect someone who can't see? Like hypnotic pattern, which says each creature in the area who sees the pattern must make a wisdom saving throw. So if I'm blinded, but using Blindsight, do I see the pattern? I mean, what about other illusions? Do I know they're illusions? Do I see them at all? Oh, and let's go back to hypnotic pattern for a bit, because there's something else silly there. Like, let's say I cast hypnotic pattern, and I'm in the area. Well, it has friendly fire, so that's a problem. Can I just close my eyes when I cast it? It says that it is just there for an instant. Maybe my party knows to close their eyes when I'm casting as well, and then we could just ignore the friendly fire? Oh, but what if one of them has Blindsight? Is that going to mess up that plan? And who was it who thought, you can perceive surroundings without relying on sight, was enough information here. That brings us up to number 2, prone. Okay, so the prone condition says your only movement option is to crawl or stand up, and you have disadvantage on attack rolls, and an attack roll against you has advantage if the attacker is within 5 feet of the creature. Otherwise, the attack roll has disadvantage. Okay, so first off, let's say I'm firing a crossbow. Why do I have disadvantage when I'm prone? You would think being on your stomach and firing a crossbow would work pretty well. But let's say you're using a sling. How are you using that at all when you're prone? Or even a pike for that matter. But here's the really weird part. Okay, so it makes sense that ranged attacks against you would have disadvantage, because if you're prone, you're presenting less of a target. And it makes sense that melee attacks would have advantage, because you're less mobile and gravity isn't on your side. But what about a reach weapon? Why does swinging a halberd down on a prone enemy 10 feet away have disadvantage? Don't you still have all the theoretical advantage that any other melee weapon would give you? Then why do they get advantage and our poor halberd user has disadvantage? Unless, of course, they close the range. But how's someone with a halberd swinging that thing properly at someone within 5 feet anyways? Are they choking up on the grip? If so, shouldn't that reduce the damage or something? It's just really weird. And talking about using weapons in another way, this is, again, maybe changing the subject, but let's talk about damage types for a second. So a sword does slashing damage. And yeah, a sword certainly can slash. But can we not stab with swords anymore? If we stab someone with a sword, why are we doing slashing damage? Shouldn't that be piercing damage? Like, shouldn't we get to choose which kind of damage we're doing? And this is true of many, many weapons. I mean, the standard Warhammer is going to have a blunt end on one side, and then the other side is going to tend to have like a spike or something. And if you have a battle axe, the other side might have a hammer, or it might have a pick. There should be some way to choose which kind of damage you're going to do. But according to the rules, nope, just one kind of damage. You hit somebody with the blunt end on the back of your battle axe, and you do slashing damage. And bringing us to number 1, invisibility. Okay, so the invisible condition says an invisible creature is impossible to see without the aid of magic or a special sense. Maybe even blindsight, though it doesn't say so, as we previously discovered. For the purpose of hiding, the creature is heavily obscured. The creature's location can be detected by any noise it makes or any tracks it leaves. Then there is a different bullet point, meaning this is distinct from the first point. Attack rolls against the creature have disadvantage, and the creature's attack rolls have advantage. Now the thing is, invisibility is a condition, meaning either you have it or you don't. So if you cast greater invisibility, for example, you gain the invisible condition. And if someone is able to see you when you have that invisible condition on, it doesn't take away the condition. So let's say your opponent does have blindsight, and the DM says they can see you. Well, that doesn't actually remove the condition. So they still have disadvantage to attack you, and you still have advantage to attack them. Furthermore, let's say you cast See Invisibility. According to the spell, you see invisible creatures and objects as if they were visible. But they still have the condition. So you still have disadvantage to attack them, and they still have advantage to attack you. The only thing the See Invisibility spell actually accomplishes is it takes away heavy obscurement for the purposes of hiding. And that's it. Although it says you see them just as if they're visible, for no reason at all, invisibility is still treating you like you can't see them for attacks and being attacked. Now, if you're thinking in your head, if I can see them, then they don't have the invisible condition anymore. And therefore, they wouldn't have advantage to attack me, and I wouldn't have disadvantage to attack them. And you think I'm reading it wrong. Well, listen to this.
The invisible condition has the isolated bullet point. Attack rolls against the creature have disadvantage, and the creature's attack rolls have advantage. This means that See Invisibility and other non-sight senses don't stop the advantage on attacks from being invisible. Is this intended, assumed to be ignored, or a target for future errata?
So I love this question. It really drills into that specificity I was talking about earlier. So before I answer the question, I will also point out there are abilities in the game that explicitly say the target of them, like the Fairy Fire spell does this,
Mhm.
gains no advantage from the invisibility condition, meaning the whole thing is shut off for them, which would include this second bullet.
Mhm.
But if you're in a situation where that bullet is not explicitly shut off, and the questioner is astute in noticing that bullet does not explicitly rely on others being incapable of seeing the invisible person, because we know in D&D, this multiverse of magic, there
Mhm.
are cases where you might actually be able to discern an invisible person through some means. If the means that you're using does not explicitly shut off the advantages of the invisible condition, you can be in the odd situation of you can see them, yet that second bullet still applies. If you're wondering how to rationalize that narratively, and by the way, this is intentional, and that's why we have things in the game that explicitly shut the whole condition off, but other
Mhm.
places we don't. Imagine an invisible person, say, under the effects of the invisibility spell.
Mhm.
Even if by some means you can discern them, imagine that there still is some strange magical shimmer over them that is affecting your ability to target them effectively. If you've ever seen the old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Predator, there
Mm.
were portions in that film where people actually caught a glimpse of the predator, so you could actually see them, but the predator still was cloaked and had this odd shimmer. They were sort of semi-transparent.
Mhm.
Imagine that when you're imagining a situation, the odd situation where I can see the invisible person, but I haven't managed to overcome every aspect of the condition. So you're in this kind of in-between state in terms of your perception of them. Like, okay, I'm seeing their outline, but they still, some of the magic of their invisibility is giving them the benefit of that bullet that gives them advantage on their attack rolls, and others having disadvantage on their attack rolls against them.
Except that the rationale he gives there is pretty bogus. I mean, I've seen Predator many times, and yeah, you can kind of see him, even with the cloaking, but do you see him as if it was visible? Absolutely not. And what if we're using Blindsight? Then why would that matter at all? Totally unintuitive. And if this was intentional, which he says it was, then why on earth is See Invisible a second level spell? I mean, that's ludicrous. It's like Find Traps all over again. A spell where what it does should be dead obvious by the name of the spell. But then you dig into the details and it doesn't work. So I wasn't sure how many of these to go over in a single video, but I'll likely follow this video up with more because there are no shortage of rules that are just head scratchers in D&D. If there's a strange or weird rule you would like to see me cover in a future video, let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.